Hey, this is Mike from the Run Testers. I am here with Tom and Nick. We are going to be talking watches again. We're going to be talking about this watch here, the Garmin Forerunner. Oh, that's the Garmin Forerunner 255. That's a 245. Now, this is the watch that kind of sits just above the Forerunner 55. And the 745 and the 955 sits above the 255 as well. So in terms of the 245, the big kind of feature there was kind of adding music and making it more of a smartwatch-like experience. Now with the 255, I would kind of argue that Garmin's kind of gone back to its kind of roots in terms of making sure there's some strong running focus features there. So I'll take you through some of the top line kind of things that you can kind of expect on the Forerunner 255. So we've now got two size options. There is now the multi-band mode that we got on the 955 Epix and the Fenix 7. There is HRV status, which we spoke about in our 955 review, and that's kind of related to recovery. And then we've got outside of running, there's a triathlon and open water swinger mode, so it's become more of a triathlon kind of friendly watch as well. And there is battery improvements as well. Essentially, Garmin is promising double the battery of what we got in 245. So we're first going to get into design. And in terms of what we're getting in design, as I said, we are getting two case sizes this time, whereas the 245 had one size. I think that was 42 millimeters. We're now getting a 46 millimeter and a 41 millimeter case option. So we were all testing the 255S, which is the smaller version. So guys, how did you find the 255S? How did it compare, if you've used the 245 in comparison, how does it kind of sit with the other watches in this price range from a design point of view? Tom, we'll start with you.
The 255S, I think it's a really nice, well-made watch. It feels very comfortable. I'm not a fan of really small watches. I know Nick is. I like to have a bit of weight on my wrist, so I probably wouldn't have gone for the 255S. I'd probably have gone for the normal 255. But I think it is a very nicely built watch. It feels quite rugged. It doesn't feel cheap in any way, and I like the design of the buttons and everything. I think it's a really nice watch.
Yeah, I think it's really dinky. It's very dinky, very cute watch, isn't it? Like I would have gone for the standard size Forerunner 255 if we were choosing the review samples, and that is still a very small watch, but it's got a bigger screen, I think, which is important, and you get a bit more battery life. But yeah, this is a very comfortable small watch. I think Tom actually hit the nail on the head there. Well, actually, with some of the small watches you get from brands, they can feel a bit cheap and not as premium as bigger watches, but actually this feels like a very, very nice shrunk down, like, I don't know, 945, something like that, shrunk into a smaller case. Still very easy to read the screen, even though it is a bit smaller than the other size watch. So yeah, I think design's win. It's very, very familiar. It feels like a Garmin on the wrist, just a bit smaller, so in line with something like the Forerunner 55, but with a lot more kind of features packed into it.
Yeah, nothing major for me on the design front. I think it's very similar in terms of what we're getting in terms of design language from the other kind of Forerunners that are out there. I mean, the size difference hasn't really made a difference for me. It's still a small, kind of nice, light watch. The screen, it's still a transfective display. We haven't got an AMOLED. Garmin is not really doing it in its Forerunner range yet. And yeah, from a visibility point of view, the screen is absolutely fine. Strap, there's nothing really kind of major on that front either. I think in terms of Garmin have pretty much stuck to their guns. They've changed the case size, but ultimately it feels very familiar. And if you've used, I think, the 245, things like the 745 and the 955, you'll get an idea of what you kind of expect on this watch. So nothing major. There's no touchscreen. There's no solar power here. That's kind of reserved for other watches in Garmin's range. So yeah, nothing majorly different for me in terms of my experience with the 255S. And then kind of getting into those kind of the run experience, the run test, how you kind of got on with this watch. And obviously everything you get in the 245 is here in the 255, and we're starting to see things come in from Garmin's more expensive watches. So we are seeing we're seeing the multi-band mode that we saw in the Fenix 7 and the Epix and the 955, and that's all about improving that kind of outdoor kind of run tracking accuracy, where it can predominantly be kind of very tricky in terms of areas. And we're also getting that kind of navigation support, which has been there. It's pretty similar in terms of what we've had before on the 245. Now, guys, how have you found in terms, I think first on that multi-band mode and having it in a cheaper model in the Garmin range, and also just generally the kind of running accuracy and tracking experience, how have you found it?
Well, GPS actually is a subject close to my heart. I was very, very excited that they brought multi-band down to this price point, because it has been something that's been reserved for more expensive watches in Garmin's range. And I think I and you guys all had the same, like 955, Epix 2, Fenix 7, excellent GPS accuracy, multiband mode. So I thought having it on the smaller watch is brilliant. I will say it hasn't actually been as good for me as those other watches, and I don't know if this is a watch by watch basis or if it is just different on the smaller watch. But I found that what it's good, it's an improvement on the 245. That's probably the biggest takeaway here. Is the accuracy here is better than on the previous version. I found in terms of when I was running, especially tight loops, going through tricky environments like the forest or under high buildings, you get a slightly clearer reading. You're nearly always on the right side of the road, that kind of thing. You're not cutting corners. However, I did find on some loops, I do a lot of basically hard workouts on the road, and I'll be doing them on generally small loops that I know will be fairly free of people and good surface, that kind of thing. And when I had it, side by side with the 955, I was consistently getting a faster pace and more distance covered in the 255, and it just tended to get a bit excited on loops. It was, if I kept going around, let's say like a 1k, 1.5k loop, it would put me onto the far side of the road. Things like just add a little bit of distance every corner, that kind of thing. So it wasn't flawless. It wasn't actually as good as some of the other multiband GPS I've tested from Garmin, but it was still very good and an improvement on what you get from the classic GPS plus GLONASS setting that used to be what you'd use on Garmin's, basically.
Yeah, pretty much the same for me. What I'd say is that I've been running in this watch along with the 955 and the Garmin Fenix 6, because I haven't got the 7, so I've been using that to sort of compare. The 955 and the 255 over my normal runs, so not looped runs, just going, out for 15k or so, they were pretty close. There wasn't a lot in it. It wasn't a noticeable difference. But what I did find when I was running in the watches on the track without using a track mode, the 955 was significantly better at really picking up the track loop than the 255 was. So I do think there is some, I'd probably say minor for me, disparity with the GPS when using multiband. It's not massive, but yeah, there is a little bit of a drop off. But it wasn't an issue. It's still better than the Fenix 6.
Yeah, I mean, I found multiband generally okay for me. I probably didn't see as many discrepancies in terms of data. I think I was using it against a 955. I was using it against a Polar as well, and some other kind of smartwatches, which clearly kind of inferior in terms of that performance. But I generally found it okay. I think, the experience, the fact that it does kind of double, I would say, the kind of battery hit that you get. And that's the kind of sacrifice you make in terms of getting that more accurate data. But for me, it worked pretty well. In terms of other kind of metrics, it was pretty solid. I actually found the heart rate tracking performance a little bit better than I got from the 955. I found it pretty good on steady pace runs. Actually, on kind of the high intensity stuff that I did, it was generally around 2 or 3 kind of BPM out from a chest strap for me. So generally the kind of heart rate performance did well. I would still grab a heart rate monitor chest strap, but generally that performance kind of surprised me and it actually did really well. How did you guys find in terms of heart rate performance and any kind of other metrics you kind of rely on in terms of your tracking time?
Heart rate was good. Yeah, definitely better than 955 when I was testing it out, especially when I'm doing track intervals. It sort of picked up the peaks and troughs a little bit better. So yeah, I definitely saw a nice improvement on the 255 for heart rate.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of the better heart rate monitors watches I've tested lately. I think my basic belief, especially with the Garmin range, is that the smaller, the lighter the watch, the better the heart rate, the closer the fit to the wrist, and the more secure the fit. Something like the Epix moves around a bit on the run, and this doesn't. I think the only run I really noticed it being out of whack was where I did 8 30-second hill sprints, so about as hard as you can challenge as you can get for heart rate, because it obviously rises very quickly when you're running up a hill at speed. And for that, it just didn't hit the same peak as a chest strap. But every other run, including longer intervals, even like 400 intervals on the track, it was more or less spot on, to the point where it's one of the few watches you could probably not use a dedicated chest strap with if you were prepared to risk it occasionally. I think it's that accurate, but at the same time, it is summer now and things are a bit more accurate, I think, in the warm. So in the winter, I'd probably be tempted to pair a chest strap anyway.
Okay, and just thought a little bit kind of thoughts on the navigation. Obviously, it hasn't changed massively from what we got on the 245, and obviously you're not getting the level of kind of mapping and navigation support you get on the top range Garmin. So have you guys found anything different in terms of that experience, or have you found it generally the same in terms of what you've experienced on this kind of end the market of Garmin's watches and navigation support?
Yeah, I think it's nice, works fine. As I always say, when it comes to breadcrumb navigation, it's great when you're on trails and stuff, but when you're trying to run through cities and things, it's a bit trickier because you can end up going down little alleyways and stuff and having to come back on yourself. But yeah, I think it's one of the best breadcrumb navigations out there, really clear and nice to use.
navigation is exactly the same. I think it's pretty good. It's breadcrumb navigation. So I was away for a week or so on holiday in the Forest of Bowland. I had the 955 and the 255. Put routes on them both when I was trying to work out where I was going, and just to see the kind of difference in tracking using just a line and a pointer and turn-by-turn directions compared to the full maps on the 955. And it's obviously better with maps, but you're paying 200 quid more for those maps, whatever it is, or 150 quid more. So breadcrumb navigation will get you there, and it's got back to start, which is great, and it's got turn-by-turn direction. So I think it's as good as anything on the market that isn't full maps, and only really Garmin does that very well. So they're obviously reserving it for their most expensive watches, so I think it's perfectly happy with the navigation stuff on here.
Yeah, I think this level of navigation is pretty much what you're going to see at this price range, and in terms of what you're getting in the 255, I think it's going to be good enough for most people. If you want that fuller kind of mapping experience, you're going to have to ultimately pay for it. I think at that end of the market in terms of Garmin and Polar and Coros, I mean, that's what you're paying, a lot of the money for. So yeah, for me, navigation and mapping support has felt very similar, very familiar for me. So we are going to get into training and analysis. So there's a lot kind of happening here on this front. Not as much as what we got in 955. We'll get into that, but kind of some of the key things that we will get into. The first being morning reports, which is a feature that was included on 955. HRV status, which is another feature that's been included in 955 as well, and that's kind of related to recovery and giving you more insights in terms of understanding what your recovery needs are. Now, you don't get the training readiness feature that you do get on the 955, which kind of partners this feature, and we'll get into that as well. And then you've got things like the visual race predictor and the race widget as well. But we'll start with morning reports. Now, for me, it's the experience having, and you guys as well, you've been using the 955 as well. The morning reports have felt very similar in terms of what I've experienced on that watch. It's a nice feature. I think we kind of all agree it's a feature that could improve over time. But it's a nice feature to have. How have you guys found it? Have you found it useful? Have you found the experience very different in terms of using it on the 955 and the 255?
I really like it. I bang on about the morning report quite a bit, just because I like having something to look at when I wake up in the morning. But yeah, I think it's a nice feature. I think there's a lot that it could become. I think it's like the first iteration of something that could be really good over time. In testing against the 955, I found it pretty much spot on. I was getting the same information every day, bar a few disparities in the actual data from like HRV stuff, but I think it's almost identical to 955 what information that I was getting.
See, I'm going to come in hard and disagree. I not that big. I don't mind the morning report. I think it's fine, but I think probably the only stat I was using from either watch from the morning report that I found interesting was training readiness, which is only on the 955. So the 255, like I say, and I said it in the 95 video as well, like the morning report is a lovely idea, but it needs to, I think, be able to be delivered at a certain time rather than here it is in the morning. You're woken up. You have to look at this now because, like I said, I get woken up by my toddler and I can't look at my watch then. The same problem I had with the HRV for training app. I couldn't do my thing when I woke up because I get woken up by a child. So I've got no time to glance at my morning report. So I think it needs to be delivered at a time that suits you. That would be the most useful thing from it. And it's a massive loss, I think, not having training readiness on the watch.
Has anyone slept in past lunchtime and seen if you still get the morning report?
I reckon I might
have. yeah, Mike's definitely tested that one out.
And obviously we've talked about morning reports, and we've said that kind of one of the components of that is HRV status. Now, this is essentially Garmin using heart rate variability measurements to kind of help users better understand what their recovery needs are. Now, as we kind of mentioned, the 955 has this as well, but it also has training readiness, which kind of makes use of that kind of information and kind of presents that information, and I think it makes that insight a bit more understandable. So HRV status in isolation, is it a useful feature to have on the 255 when you don't have the training readiness feature there as well? Nick, what do you think?
I think it basically can be, but it's going to require a lot more effort on your part to really keep track of the numbers. You get the big balanced range to sit within, and it's quite a wide range, and actually if you just sit within that, you can maybe just go on fine then. I think it's a really tricky one because obviously training readiness I think is the star feature in this area on the 955. It's the best. It's the reason to upgrade to the 955. But actually, this is the watch aimed at people who would benefit the most from having all those features, all that information explained in a one neat way, like training readiness, because obviously it's aimed at the kind of mass market. The 955 is probably aimed at more serious athletes who might actually use their individual HRV status numbers or have a better idea about what they should do for their training. Whereas I think the training readiness would have been fantastic on the 255 for people who are a little bit less maybe aware of what they're going to go and do with their running. Having that number there that explained HRV or puts it in context would have been more useful. So I think it's a big loss not to have training readiness. And HRV status, yeah, you have to do a bit more work on your end, and I wouldn't do it, and I don't know if I'd expect loads of users. I think having it dumbed down into a number might make it less accurate, because obviously it's gone through Garmin's algorithm or whatever, and maybe there's some, and people who really want the raw data, having it there is great, but I think having an explanation there as well, rather than just balanced or not, would give people a bit more context. That would be useful on a watch in the mid-range like this.
Okay, Tom, and how about you? What's your thoughts on HRV status?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a bit before we did the 955, that in isolation it's not a very useful piece of information, and I didn't really understand it the first few times I looked at that until I investigated the details, which I don't think many people will do. If it's not given to you in a clear and useful way, then people probably will ignore it. And at this level, with the 255, I think the number of people that will bother to work out what it means is going to be negligible in comparison to something like the 955 or Fenix range. So I think the information's good, but I don't think it needs to be delivered in that way. It's nice to know that the watch is storing that information and applying it to your, other features that may come along. I mean, training readiness would be the logical thing for it, but I think in isolation it's a little bit of a useless tool for most people.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately a bit bizarre that the training readiness feature isn't on the 250, where it would make more sense compared to the 950, where you think people are kind of digging a bit more into their data, can probably start to interpret that information a bit more. So I'm surprised it's not there. Obviously, for users, they have to create that baseline as well before you start getting those insights. So for me, yeah, I would agree. It's surprising for me that the training readiness, which feels like a feature designed for people who are starting to think about their data, but need that kind of more of that guidance of what that means. It's not there on the 255. Now, what is on the 255 are the race widget and then also the visual race predictor, which is, I think it's started to filter through from other Garmin watches. And ultimately, it's about helping you better understand where you might be at in terms of your training. The race widget is about, ultimately helping you count down to that big kind of race day. There is the ability to kind of see suggested workouts based on that as well. Now, is it a good feature? Is it something that people are going to find useful, or is it going to be kind of, it might interfere with the training or what they're thinking about in terms of that preparation for that race day already?
Yeah, I'm not that bothered about the race widget. I don't find it that useful. I mean, I know when I've got a race coming up. I don't have to be reminded all the time. And I don't think the suggestive workouts have any real impact on it. They didn't seem to be giving me the right workouts for what I was doing. I think I can't remember which race I put in. I think I put a marathon in, a random one. I can't remember now. But it just didn't seem to match the information that I put in. But for the race predictors, interestingly, when I was testing the 255, my 5k time went down to 17:30, which my current 5k time is 18:47. So I was quite pleased with that. I thought I was getting super fit. Since then, I've gone back to my Garmin Fenix 6, and it's gone back up to 19. So that does make me think that the algorithm that pulls that data through isn't particularly accurate. And it always gives me times that I think my marathon time at the moment is like 3:40. Considering I got 3:12 a few months ago, I don't think it's, and Garmin knows I did that. I don't think it's that useful. But I do like the new graphs. The new graphs that show the where you are. It reminds me of something like Run Britain rankings, where you go in and go, oh, nice, yeah, good. So it's a nice visual way to do it instead of just having a sort of random number that you don't believe.
I like it. It's nice. It's nice to have on the watch. I think it's quite interesting to have a countdown there, and getting the weather forecast near the day of the race would be very exciting. I'm always obsessing about weather when I'm nearing my big marathons in particular. It's not a game changer. It's a bit like morning report for me. I think it's quite nice. It's there, but the suggested workouts changing, I don't know. I struggle to keep tabs. I think the suggested workouts are fine on the Garmin. I think if you're new to running and you just follow those, you're going to get fitter, but they're not that targeted or precise or anything like that. The race predictions are still a bit out of whack for me. They always have been. They're always quite generous to me at 5k and then very harsh on me at marathon. And it's interesting that you now get a trend line to see how your time's getting, improving over the course of your training. But I would be interested to see. So I thought, when I started marathon training, my marathon predicted time would come down. Like I've done a 22 miler and stuff like that in the run. I've been putting some marathon specific training in. My marathon time hasn't changed at all, but apparently I'm getting quicker over 5k. So that for me spells out that those are a bit dumb and not really worth using. But yeah, the race widget, knowing when your races are coming up is quite nice.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I find the visual race predictor a little bit more useful than the race widget. I think the race widget potentially could be useful, but I think there's a lot of things that Garmin's tried to do in terms of helping you decide what to do. And I think this almost is complicating, adding another thing that kind of may make you making that decision about what you should do. And ultimately, you just want to keep that process simplified as possible if you're training as well. So yeah, I think it's a nice idea. I don't think it's the best feature on this watch. I did want to touch on Smartwatch Features because I think with the 245, that's kind of the direction that Garmin was going with this watch. Obviously, it does have dedicated or more smartwatch-like watches in its range. Nothing has massively changed in terms of what you get here in terms of that support. The one thing I did notice was that for music streaming, you can now switch between a stereo and mono mode, which ultimately should improve battery life performance when you're streaming music. I found it didn't massively change the experience. It's still going to drain battery life in the way that kind of listening to stereo mode. In general, in terms of the smartwatch features, if you do use the smartwatch features, how have you found it using it as a smartwatch in general?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for smartwatch features in a watch, you're not going to be disappointed in it, but equally you're not going to be amazed. There's not it's not something that Garmin are really focused on developing amazing new things in, but most people, that's all they want. So I think it's fine when you combine it with all the other features that you get. If they were the main thing, I think they would be lacking a little bit.
With the screen's a bit, small for notifications, but it's fine. I think everything's kind of fine. And the music is, I think, very good on Garmin's. If you're a Spotify user or one of the other premium services that it links up to, it's pretty easy to use now. The connection to headphones, I think, is reliable. I've not had problems with that anymore. Kind of wearing it on either wrist. It more depends on the headphones than the watch, I'd say now. So yeah, the music features they are a big selling point of this watch in the mid-range. Chorus and Polar just aren't looking at that kind of thing at this price, and it's a big advantage to have music on your wrist for some people. I don't tend to use it very much, apart from when I'm testing out a watch. But yeah, I think all round it's not very smart, but you get watch faces, music, that kind of stuff is all quite, NFC payments if you can work out how to set it up on Garmin. So yeah, it's all there, but not that well developed.
Cool. Okay, now we're going to get into a big one, which is obviously, when you're talking about running watches, you don't want to be charging it on a regular basis. Garmin is promising improved battery life performance. It's basically saying it's doubling kind of smartwatch mode in terms of that battery life. So you're going from kind of 7 up to 12 to 14 days, depending on whether you go for the 255 or 225SS. You're getting 26 hours on the smaller 255S in GPS mode and then 30 hours in full GPS mode on the 255. And also with multiband mode, that is going to impact on battery life performance. So how have you guys found the battery life performance? What kind of battery you're getting based on the training that you've been doing and the features that you've been using?
So if you're getting a watch multiband on it, I'm going to be turning multiband on. So I almost think that GPS number, it's gone. It's the multiband number that matters. And so using it every day for runs, I've been doing quite a lot of running in it. It won't last a week on a single charge. It's the 255S. Now, I think it's pretty good, given that it is multiband. I'm not using the music. If you use the music, you are going to be rinsing it. It's going to be every couple of days, I think. But I was probably getting 5-6 days in a charge for a watch this small with multiband GPS, running every day for over an hour. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, I got a little bit longer than Nick did, but I don't do as much running as Nick does. So, and also I'd say, I think with the 255 as opposed to the 955, even outside of testing features, I probably wasn't using anywhere near as many features as there were in the 955. So I probably wasn't using the battery up as much as I probably would have done if I was using more features, obviously. But I was seeing up to about 7 days. I was generally getting about a week on what the training that I was doing and how I was using the watch.
Yeah, I say I was getting slap bang kind of a week. I was using multiband mode in my testing, and obviously that does impact on the kind of battery life you get in comparison to kind of full GPS mode. But for most people, using that full GPS mode will be absolutely fine. And from that point of view, I think you could potentially get double than what you got on the 245, but I think if you are training on a regular basis and using multiband mode, it's probably you're looking at a week's worth of training. As I said, with the kind of music streaming, I don't think there's a massive difference in terms of having that stereo kind of mono kind of listening option in terms of the drop off. Those feet, music streaming, using the pulse ox sensor, these are things that still are going to drain the battery life in a kind of undesirable way. So for me, I think it's good for a week, which I think is fine and is going to be fine for most people. And in terms of what you're going to get from other watches in this range, that's pretty much there in terms of performance. Okay, so let's get into our verdict on the Forerunner 255. First of all, is it a great running watch? If you've used the 245, does it feel like a good upgrade? And also, how does it kind of fare against those other options that are around this price? So I'm thinking things like the Polar Pacer Pro, probably the Coros Epix. Tom, how have you found? What's your take on the 255?
Yeah, I think it's a great solid watch. I think it actually has a lot of nice advanced features that probably wouldn't have expected a watch at this level. I think it's definitely it's going to do everything most people probably want at that level, apart from something like training readiness. But I do think it's a very solid, reliable, enjoyable watch to wear. And to be honest, when I was training in it against the 955, there wasn't much that I was missing from the 255. I could look at either arm basically and find the information that I wanted.
And Nick, how have you found it? Obviously, you've used the 245. How have you found it compared to that? Do you think it's a good upgrade? And then also in terms of the other watches around this price range, how do you think it compares?
So I think it's a fantastic watch. I'm ever so slightly disappointed. I think I'll say that because it is more expensive. It's it's £50, $50 rise across the board, and I think a lot of what you're getting there, the big feature, is almost the fact it's now a multi-sport watch. I think it's a fantastic value multi-sport watch, but I am not a multi-sport athlete, and I don't do any of that silly swimming and cycling really, apart from to get to runs. So I think that I think the fact there is a price rise there. I was probably hoping for more from multiband mode. I'm hoping it would be just as good as on the 955 in Garmin Epix. I didn't see that. I don't know if that's going to be the case across the board, but that was a slight disappointment. And then no training readiness, I think, is a big loss. I do understand that Garmin has to reserve features for the higher watches, but no one's upgrading, I think, from a 255 to a 955 because of training readiness. They're upgrading for music, maps, bigger battery, bigger watch. That's what you're, not music, but maps, bigger battery, maps really. That's what you're upgrading for, and better training analysis. But training readiness, I think, should be on this watch, and that is a big loss for me. So comparing it to other watches in the area, I think there's nothing from other brands I'd buy ahead of this. I think there's certainly a case for buying the Coros Pace 2 as a much cheaper watch because you're getting such good tracking and everything there. You are losing some of the smart features like music and breadcrumb navigation from this, but if you can live without them, the Coros Pace is now a lot cheaper. I almost think the biggest rival though is the Forerunner 245, which recently popped up in sales for very cheap. It was like 100, I think, to £30 for the non-music version, and it was well under £200 for the music version. For runners, I think you might as well get the 245. I think you're going to get slightly less accurate GPS, but it's still very accurate, and for the most case, just as good in real life situations as the 255. And you're losing out on things like HRV status that aren't a big loss, I don't think, and the multisport mode, which if you're not a multisport athlete isn't a big loss. If you are a multisport athlete, then there's the Coros Pace 2 that does have multisport mode. But so I think that is probably good. I think it's as good as anything in the mid-range. It's the best watch in the mid-range. It's better than the 245 for sure, but there's certainly a case for saying there's better value to be found elsewhere, especially with the price rise.
Yeah, I'd probably go with that as well. I think the 255, it's a nice light watch. I think the data is generally good. It's good to have multi-band there, which I found has been pretty good. And if you care about that GPS accuracy, I think you can get an improvement in terms of what you got on the 245. I'm disappointed that the training readiness is not there as well. And I think battery life in comparison to the 245, although the numbers say it's bigger, I think ultimately if you use it to its fullest, it's probably going to be about the same in terms of that battery life. It's going to be a week, which I think is probably what you got on the 245, probably maybe a little bit less. So I think in terms of an upgrade, I think if you can pick up the 245 for cheaper, I still think that's a very strong watch to get. I think in terms of other watches around this price range, I think you're looking at things like the Polar Pacer Pro. Probably the Coros Epix is similar in terms of price as well. I think the Epix probably has slightly better battery life, GPS battery life, but that's kind of in the bigger model. I think with the Polar Pacer Pro, you may be getting a little bit more in terms of that recovery analysis. Maybe it's a bit more nicely presented in comparison when you don't have that training readiness feature. I think the battery life is very similar in terms that you're getting with the Pacer Pro and the 255. So I think out of those options, I would probably still go for 255. But if you're looking at the 255 and the 245, I would probably go for the 245 as well, unless you are really set on, or you're, that more accurate GPS kind of performance. Then that's kind of what I think you're going to get on that front. So yeah, that is our verdict on the Garmin Forerunner 255. Now, if you've got any questions about our testing or other watches you want to know how it compares to, let us know in the comments. As always, like, subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos. Let us know if you want to see us do more videos in vests, because we're definitely up for doing that as well.
So hot.
And yeah, we'll see you for the next Run Testers video.